Welcome to Headline Wednesday from Dispatch U.S. Military History Magazine, developed by trackpads.com.
Each week, we take one pivotal moment from United States military history and follow it from the first warning signs to the final outcome.
Today, we go to the Iranian desert during the Iran hostage crisis for the story of Operation Eagle Claw.
A longer version of this feature, with fact sheets and photos, is available in the print edition, either on LinkedIn or by email. Shortly before midnight on 24 April 1980, a lonely stretch of Iranian desert known as Desert 1 flickered to life with dim lights and engine noise. Specially modified transport aircraft from the United States Air Force settled onto the rough strip, their cargo ramps yawning open to the night. Delta operators and rangers stepped down into sand and darkness after a long, low flight that had kept them beneath radar and away from prying eyes. Somewhere out beyond their perimeter, Marine helicopter crews were fighting their own battle, pushing through violent sandstorms to reach the same point in the desert. The mission had finally moved from planning rooms to the real world.
At ground level, the air felt like talc. Rotor wash from the first arriving Marine heavy-lift helicopters whipped blinding clouds of dust across the landing zone, turning men and machines into ghostly shapes. Operators pulled scarves and goggles tight, shouting over the roar of turbines and blades as they tried to read tail numbers and hand signals. They had come to begin a daring rescue of American hostages held in Tehran, a mission rehearsed for months and argued over at the highest levels of government. Tonight, the plan would either take flight or end right there in the sand.
From the beginning, everyone involved knew the plan was fragile. It depended on a precise sequence of air movements, refueling operations, and link-ups that left little room for delay or malfunction. And it required that a minimum number of helicopters arrive at Desert 1 ready to go forward. As minutes stretched into an hour and more, officers and enlisted men stared into the darkness and listened to scratchy radio calls that carried more static and bad news than comfort. One helicopter turned back with serious mechanical trouble before reaching the site, and another went missing in the storm for a long, worrying stretch. With each report, the already thin margin for error narrowed further.
On the ground, the operators tried to keep their focus while the situation slowly unraveled around them. They checked weapons again, traced routes on maps under dim light, and rehearsed in their heads how they would move from this desert to a hide site and then into Tehran. Friction kept arriving in unexpected forms. A civilian bus rolled into the area, its passengers stunned to see armed strangers in large aircraft blocking the road, and it had to be stopped and controlled. Fuel trucks edged dangerously close to spinning rotors in the blowing dust. What had looked clean and choreographed on planning slides now felt cramped, chaotic, and unforgiving. And when the last helicopter finally limped in, damaged and late, the central question shifted from how to push on to whether the mission could safely continue at all.
The confusion and tension at Desert 1 only made full sense against the backdrop of the Iran hostage crisis. In November 1979, Iranian militants had stormed the United States Embassy in Tehran and taken dozens of diplomats and staff hostage, turning them into bargaining chips in a revolution still settling scores. Night after night, Americans saw images of blindfolded hostages and chanting crowds on their television screens. The crisis humiliated Washington, poisoned relations with the new regime in Tehran, and became a running test of President Carter's resolve. Diplomatic efforts dragged on without a breakthrough, and the hostages grew older in captivity as the days turned into months.
The men gathered at Desert 1 were the spear point of a new American capability that was still taking shape. Delta Force had been built as a dedicated counterterrorism and hostage rescue unit, but it had never been used on this scale and at this distance. It was joined by Rangers for security, by Air Force Special Operations aviators skilled at long, low night flights, and by Marine helicopter crews tasked with pushing heavy, aging airframes to their limits. These units came from different services, with different cultures and chains of command, assembled for a single mission that demanded flawless coordination without a standing joint special operations structure to back them up. They were learning joint work in the harshest classroom possible.
The plan that finally emerged was intricate and fragile by design. Special operators and rangers would ride specially modified C-130 transports into a remote desert landing zone, refuel Marine RH-53 helicopters there, and then push deeper into Iran. They would move into the city, hit the embassy compound, and free the hostages. At the same time, rangers would seize a nearby airfield so larger transports could land, take on the rescued hostages and the assault force, and fly everyone out. Each phase depended on the one before it working on time, with almost no slack anywhere in the chain.
The helicopter leg began to unravel much more quickly. Flying from a carrier in the Arabian Sea, the RH-53 crews ran into towering walls of dust and sand that clawed at their engines and degraded their instruments and visibility. One helicopter turned back with serious mechanical trouble before ever reaching the rendezvous, shrinking the available force. Another pressed on but lost its bearings for a time in the storm, adding confusion to the already crowded radios. A third developed problems that raised real questions about its ability to continue safely. By the time the remaining helicopters staggered into Desert 1, their crews were tired, and the number of usable aircraft had fallen below what the plan called for. The helicopter column was already bleeding strength.
Inside the small command knot at Desert 1, the numbers no longer worked. Only a handful of helicopters now sat on the sand, and one of these was found to have a critical hydraulic problem after landing that made it unsafe to use. The minimum of 6 airworthy aircraft that planners had insisted on was now out of reach, and everyone knew that pressing toward Tehran with fewer machines would mean leaving people behind or accepting extreme risk. Commanders weighed the dangers of continuing with too few helicopters against the possibility of breaking contact and getting out before Iranian forces reacted in strength. After tense face-to-face discussions and calls back to higher authority, the verdict came down. The force would abort. The rescue would not move forward to the capital.
Pulling the plug did not end the danger. In the cramped, dusty landing area, transports and helicopters had to maneuver close to one another for refueling and departure, all in near-zero visibility from blowing sand and under the strain of many hours awake. Fatigue tugged at pilots and ground crews, and the physical space between spinning rotors, wings, and fuel trucks was unforgivingly small. As one RH-53 tried to reposition, it struck a waiting C-130, tearing into the larger aircraft and touching off an explosive fireball. In a heartbeat, fuel, metal, and flame turned part of Desert 1 into a killing ground. 8 American servicemen lost their lives in that collision and fire, and others were injured as they scrambled away from the burning wreckage.
With heat from the blaze licking at nearby aircraft and the risk of further explosions rising by the second, the surviving air crews and operators made a hasty, painful choice. They evacuated the site as quickly as they could, taking on wounded, counting heads, and leaving behind the bodies of the dead, as well as wrecked aircraft and equipment that could not be safely recovered. The remaining transports clawed back into the night sky, heavy with fuel fumes, smoke, and the weight of failure. Below them, the desert flickered with the flames of ruined machines and scattered gear. What had been planned as the first stage of a daring hostage rescue had become a story of loss that would soon circle the globe, a failed mission that exposed deep gaps in how the United States planned and executed its most sensitive operations.
Even in that chaos, the behavior of individual air crews and ground personnel showed what could be built on later. Pilots and loadmasters ran toward flame rather than away from it, pulling survivors from burning metal and helping injured comrades clear the crash site. Delta operators and rangers shifted in seconds from being the tip of a poised assault force to acting as an improvised rescue team.
They accounted for their people, helped evacuate the wounded, and tried to salvage what they safely could before the site had to be abandoned. The human element had not been the weak link that night. The weakness lay in how those people had been organized, equipped, and commanded.
The deeper turning effect of Eagle Claw did not arrive while sand still blew across scorched fuselages. It arrived in the months and years that followed, when leaders pored over what had gone wrong and what had actually gone right in the desert. They saw that courage and skill on the ground had not been enough to overcome gaps in joint planning, in dedicated special operations aviation, and in unified command arrangements. The operation had asked ad hoc structures to support a mission that required a permanent, well-practiced system. The hard lessons written in fire at Desert One became the seed of a fundamentally different approach to American special operations.
Inside the armed forces, the aftermath took a more technical, yet no less emotional form. Investigations and review boards mapped the chain of decisions that had produced Eagle Claw's structure and limitations. They highlighted the absence of a standing Joint Special Operations headquarters to plan and command missions that crossed service lines. They noted how few aviators were trained specifically for long-range, night, low-level infiltrations with Special Operations forces on board. They documented how elite units from different services had been stitched together in an ad hoc way for this one operation, instead of being supported by a unified system built for such tasks from the ground up. Out of those findings grew new institutions and capabilities. A permanent Joint Special Operations Command took shape, designed to bring together elite units under a single framework for planning, training, and execution. Specialized aviation units were built to give special operators dedicated helicopter and fixed-wing support, flown by crews who would make demanding night and low-level missions their professional focus. Over time, these changes fed into broader reforms in how the services shared resources, authorities, and responsibilities for special operations. The shadow of Desert One lay behind many of the charts, directives, and funding lines that slowly reshaped that world. The impact reached far beyond organizational boxes on a slide. Doctrine and training began to treat complex, deep penetration operations as recurring tasks that needed structured rehearsal, realistic joint exercises, and robust contingency planning, rather than one-time improvisations. Future missions in Grenada, Panama, and the long campaigns after September 11 drew on units, aircraft, and command arrangements that traced their lineage back to the lessons of Eagle Claw. When people watched later hostage rescues or special operations raids unfold with apparent precision, they were seeing an altered echo of that night in 1980. For students of military history, the story of Desert One offers more than a tale of failure. Staff officers working on new plans, and visitors studying a display about Eagle Claw in a museum can see how one painful episode forced a major power to confront its own limits. The operation shows that even highly capable forces can stumble when their structures, communications, and preparations do not match the risks they are asked to carry. It also shows that those failures can drive real change when leaders choose to learn from them rather than hide from them. The night of broken rotors in a remote desert became the dark starting point for a new American special operations era.